All right. Well, we might kick things off and to start with, thanks everybody for joining me for today's event in conversation with Shannah Kennedy. And I'll properly introduce you in just a moment, Shannah. But before I do, just a couple of quick points. Today's event's going to run for approximately 30 minutes, and then there'll be a chunk of time at the end for some questions. And to that end, do please submit any of the questions or anything that you'd like to hear more about. There's a Q&A button on the screen for questions, but also by all means interact with us in the chat. We'll be having a look at that through it. The more you interact, the more you send us questions and give us chats, the more we can make sure that we're hitting the right mark for you. And frankly, it makes our lives easier. We've got some other members of the OpusXenta team online with me as well. So if you have any technical issues or anything, same thing, fire that into the chat or the QA and they can assist. And if there isn't a question or anything that we don't get time to at the end, today's event is being recorded and those copies will be provided to everyone who registered along with some supporting materials. So if there's anything that we say today that you'd like more of or that you're interested in or that you have colleagues or friends that you would be interested in, please pass it on, share it as widely and as freely as you can. So that out of the way, my name is John Haley. I'm part of the ANZ team here at OpusXenta, and I'm going to be the host of today's event. And now it's my very great pleasure to introduce our guest and our featured speaker, Shannah Kennedy. Thanks for joining us, Shannah.
Thanks, it's great to be here today.
And we can see online here a little bit about you, and I can tell everyone here from my personal experience that just a few minutes with Shannah, you won't need to know the background to see the enormous strength and value that her experience and her advice can bring. And of course, as it says here, if you want to find out more, reach out to us, but more directly, reach out directly to Shannah via the website there. Or of course, you can hang around with us for about the next half an hour and find out a bit more too. So to that end, there's a bunch of places that we're going to go today, but let's, I guess, start with the obvious one. Shannah, in a sector such as death care, on one hand, I think it's quite obvious, but why is self-care so important in a sector like this?
I think that, you know, when you're in a sector, especially this one, where we're caring for other people all the time, we're really at the brunt of people's rawest emotions all the time, that we need to see that we're the asset at the end of the day. And what are we doing to care for ourselves? It's a little bit like that analogy of the oxygen tank in the plane, where you put on the mask and then you go and help everybody else. So I think it's really important to think about who's filling your tank, who is looking after you, because nobody else really does. So we need to make sure that we're very conscious of making sure that we don't burn out and then we're not exhausted, so that we can handle looking after everybody else and their grief and everything that comes along with what's happening in your sector.
Yeah, and I guess to that point, you know, there are so many things, so many stresses and things being pulled in so many different directions. How do we start, I guess, making sense of all of those sorts of things and creating our priorities and that sort of thing?
Well, you know, put your hand up or put in the chat if you really feel burnt out at the moment. And I think last year was an incredible year where, you know, we all had to change and to adapt, especially in your industry where, you know, people couldn't grieve in their normal way. And you probably felt the brunt of a lot of that. So I think it's about starting from the basics to think about, you know, what can I do to control the controllables and take a little bit of control back of myself so that I don't feel so burnt out. So I need to think about, how do I care and refuel myself so that I can show up in my job with some lightness and what I need to bring to execute the job really well.
Yeah, and you know, as you say, who's filling the bucket? You know, who's filling your tank? Well, you know, we need to fill it ourselves as well. Obviously, the word self-care is right in there. You know, do you have any steps?
Yeah, it's control the controllables. So I know from my own example of burnout, I married my job in my 20s. I was 7 days a week. I absolutely loved my job. I didn't really have much regard for filling my own tank or caring for myself. And I actually thought that self-care was selfish. instead of thinking of it as caring for the asset, which is myself, so I can have longevity in my career and show up for my family and my friends. So I burnt the candle. I really didn't have a self-care strategy, and it cost me my health. So for 20 years, I've had chronic fatigue, and with that comes depression. So every single day, that's what I live with. I have it doesn't go away. You have to completely change your lifestyle because you forgot to care for yourself. So we just don't want people to get into that state where they've forgotten to care about themselves, and they've burnt the tank. The oxygen's gone too low, and it comes at a really, really big cost. So I know what burnout feels like. And I think if any of you are starting to feel the effects of burnout, it's time to think of what is the strategy that you might have to start to fill your tank just gently and slowly, where it's self-care, it's not selfish. So protecting the asset, which is yourself, comes from knowing your pathway through. And it always starts with you controlling the controllables and coming back to self. So what are your values? And I think what happens when we're on the treadmill here, of the treadmill of life, and we just keep, same old every single day, is that we need to go back and find a foundation that really works for us. And it's always going back to your values. That's the concrete that we build the house on. So understanding what's most important to you personally, rather than what's important to everybody else. So, I'm always helping other people. That's my job. I listen to everybody's stories. I listen to all of their problems, and I help them find a pathway through. And we want to protect ourselves from taking all of that on, because it's just too much. When you might have 10 people a day, it's just too much. So I always go back to working for the boss, which are my values, which is my own health. And health doesn't mean, do I feel amazing today? Health is, what am I doing to support my mental health? What am I doing to support my physical health, eating, moving, sleeping? What am I doing for my emotional health, my ability to give, but also where am I receiving? Where am I being open to receiving help, or putting my hand up and asking for help, or receiving love? And our spiritual health, which is belonging to something greater than ourselves. So when that's the boss for me, and the second one for me is family happiness. And that doesn't mean is my family happy, because I've got a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old with my husband. And, those teenage years are quite difficult to navigate sometimes. So the job is, can I show up being the best version of myself? Am I a warm and nurturing mum that's fair but firm? Am I a fun and inspiring wife? And if my job is robbing me of being able to do that, I need to create some more boundaries around my job so that I can be this wonderful person that I want to be. And the third one for me is achievement. So I love setting goals. I love smashing them. I love helping everybody. But at the end of the day, the achievement for me, and the hardest achievement, is, have I actually looked after myself today? Have I taken some grounding breaths today? Have I moved my body today? Did I prepare some good food for myself today? We're just rushing from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. We need to ground ourselves. We need to take the drink stops. So when we know that that's who we work for, our values, it keeps things nice and simple in the brain. Really, really simple. So I ask these listeners to think about, what are your own values? And just to write them on a little yellow sticky note. I've got mine here. They're on a little sticky note. I can't forget who's the boss, no matter how busy I am, no matter how many people are pulling at me. I always go back to, what am I doing for my mental health, my physical health, my emotional health?
And I guess you sort of alluded to it there, but when someone sits down and says, okay, well, I'm going to put down my top three, whatever the right number is, values, I've done it before. A little while ago, my nephew had a similar task for school, and he had to do the same thing and ask some of his family members, what are your values or non-negotiables? And it was very challenging for me. Maybe that just shows something about me. I don't know. But it was very
No, I
challenging.
think it's challenging for every human, because we are disconnected from ourselves. We're so busy with doing that we forgot to be a human being, which is going back to self. And so we're so externally driven. The habit of going back to self, back to home, back to what's important to us, actually is a skill that we want to start to master. So mine are up on the mirror, they're in Texter. I see them every day. I can't forget that without self, I can't be the best busy person. So there's human doings and there's human beings, and we need to remember to come back to being a bit of a human being for ourselves sometimes.
And I guess, on that same sort of note, when we were having this, the discussion in preparation for this, you used a phrase that I hadn't heard. Well, I'd heard in a different context. Mini me moments. In fact, was what you used, which I thought was a really interesting phrase.
Yeah, I love it. It's like the day is a marathon, and where are the little Gatorade stops? So don't just run the marathon and flop onto the couch at the end of the day. It's a bit like, where are the mini pauses that help you to refuel? So for me, and I think for every human being here, when we drink a lot of water, we're going to go to the bathroom. And everyone goes to the bathroom and then we rush back to our job. But we could actually just slow it down a little bit and maybe take a couple of breaths, really think about grounding ourselves, maybe looking in the mirror. You've got this. That was a really tough couple of hours. We've got a couple of tough ones to go. Have that conversation with your best friend, which is yourself, and just taking those mini pauses. It's just the breath. The breath is life. The breath is medicine. The breath is grounding us. The breath is taking away the cortisol out of the body. So we want to breathe it out. And what we find is, and when you'll see everybody grieving, all of these wonderful people out there in this sector, is no one's breathing that are grieving, because we're so full of cortisol and stress that no one can take a deep breath and calm down. And when we can really learn to breathe and help our nervous system, then we're not going to feel so burnt out and so exhausted. And it's that little bit of secret care. It's a little drink station during the day, is taking the deep breaths.
And I guess that's a nice segue too. There must be some parallels between what you do and what the death care sector does, in that you mentioned it there. People in the death care sector, sometimes we're dealing with people on literally the worst day of their life. And I imagine that you're frequently dealing with people in really challenging circumstances, professionally or personally. Double-barrel question from that. How do we, first of all, not take their burdens and make them our own? And then secondly, how do we know the moment to hold up our hands and say, seek out someone else or somewhere else, or whatever it might be? Do you have some advice there?
Yeah, I think over 20 years of coaching people in some incredibly difficult situations where they actually have lost a loved one. I'm not at the cold face right at the funeral day, but I'm all around it. Or they've lost their job, or someone's had a car accident, or they've had a cancer diagnosis, etc., and their whole world just stops. Is we want to be there for them, but we have to ensure that we don't take it all on, and that's very difficult. And I sort of have a plastic imaginary or glass shield around me where I have to let it bounce off, and I'm not allowed to take it out again. I'm not allowed to walk that muddy stuff into the home, because we are not our job. That's the job that we do, but we have to remember that we're a human being and a whole business apart from that. So over the years, I've learnt a mental strategy where I sort of close the filing cabinet. As I arrive home, I usually sit in my car and take, 5 or 10 deep breaths and just close that filing cabinet and say, okay, I'm home now. I need to be me now. So I think it's about having that disconnect and that little strategy going. I think that's really, really important. And the second one that you said was, when do you create the boundary where we can refer them to somebody else? So
Yep.
sometimes for me, it's like, I think they're befriending me, or they want to be my friend now, and it crosses a little bit of that line, or it's gone a little bit too far. So it's knowing where that boundary is to say, it's really wonderful to be able to help you, but I think now it's a really great time to reach out to X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
Just to deflect a little bit.
Yeah. And something you alluded to there that's really changed, in our sort of post-COVID era, or COVID normal, as we call it down here in Melbourne, at least. There was a time when most of us could pause, as you said, in the car before we came home, take those 5 deep breaths and say, work is over, home has now begun. even in death care, and particularly for people in sort of more management administrative roles, that's a really grey area now. Do you have some advice about, how to separate home and work and to get that sort of concept in a COVID normal world where so many of us are working from home?
From home, yes. And I coached this all last year where people were really blurring the lines and they just felt even more burnt out and more exhausted because they didn't have a commute time in between. So that commute time was a really interesting time that we sometimes thought was too much. It's like, oh, I'd love to work from home and not have to commute. However, it's actually a mental break where we shut the computer and we have that downtime to then be a person at home. So last year, what I was coaching a lot of people on was you have to have a tools down time. There has to be a time where it's a little bit of tools down and you go for a walk. You go for a walk around the block even. It doesn't have to be far. It doesn't have to be 1 hour, but you have a ritual that signifies, okay, it's time for me to close it down, take my breath, go for a walk outside or do whatever I need to do. And then I need to change my mindset to actually come and be a mum or a wife or a father or whatever you need to be, is you have to switch. You have to flick that switch in your brain.
Excuse me, sorry. And in a related note, and maybe circling around some of the same questions, that's the question of work-life balance, I suppose, and we've touched on that a little bit. But again, another double-barreled question. For some of us, I think there's even a question of, is there such a thing as a work-life balance? But then how do we find that? Some of this we've spoken about, but
yeah, I think it's called work-life blend. I don't think that we can call it balance. I think it's a blend, that it's a mindset to feel balanced no matter where you are on that marathon journey during the day, is to allow yourself to feel balanced and not overwhelmed or anxious about anything. And if you know what your values are and you're taking those grounding breaths during the day, it's the feeling of feeling balanced, because it's not like you work 6 hours, now I can play golf. It's not a time thing, is it? It's actually a mental state. So I think if we can really accept that it's all a blend, let's just flow with life. Let's flow with what's happening at the moment. Be mindful, whether you're working, whether you're watching Netflix, whether you're watching the tennis, whether you're going for a walk, just be there. And it's fine. It's when we try to make it all mean something, or we tell ourselves all of these stories about, oh, it's too much, or just be in the moment with it. And last year, trying to coach people all day with my husband working from home and the 2 kids homeschooling, it was really difficult. And I just had to control the controllables. I had to be mindful of just where I was and enjoy just being where I was in the moment and not thinking about the 5,000 other things that were happening in the house, and just flow. And it's a beautiful word, just to flow, not to hold on so tightly, and just to allow yourself to enjoy each day for what it is. I think that's really important. And when you have your values and then you have a vision, so I always ask people, where do you want to be in 3 years' time? Your 3-year older self, what is it telling you? And my question I always ask is, what do you need to change right now for your 3-year older self? So it's a wonderful question for all these listeners to write down on a little sticky note, is what do I need to change right now for myself?
I just noticed here we've got a question that's come in from the audience that is probably a nice segue here on the similar topic. Is, you talked about sitting in the flow, which I guess is related to but different to switching on and off.
Mm-hmm.
The question here is, if you are switching on and off, do you run the risk of bottling it up inside presumably when you're on the on phase, and exploding? Any words of wisdom around that?
Well, I think when you've got a self-care strategy for yourself, so the way that you start and finish your day, you should never explode. In the mornings, I move my body for an hour first before I wake up the family and the kids. I might do some journaling, some breathing work, really grounded, getting things out, maybe writing things out, making sure the list for the day is ready. Then the day can be crazy. And then in the evening, the way that you finish your day is for people who feel overwhelmed or anxiety, it's about writing it out. It's about getting everything out of the mind as a strategy onto paper and flowing and letting things go out. We don't want to be bottling anything up. We want to be flowing, but we also want to feel like we're in control of our own journey and our own life. So if we know that we're supporting our own values, we're making decisions around our values, we have a great vision for ourselves for 3 years' time, so we keep things nice and simple, then it's about your habits. And do your habits make you feel balanced?
Drawing from the same sort of topic then, how do we know when we're in danger of that explosion or when we're not taking care of ourselves? How do I tell when I am not caring for the carer?
Yeah, well, you would feel it. So usually people have a physical reaction, so they're not sleeping very well. They have moments of panic or overwhelm, and we know that it passes through us. And when we hang on to it for too long, it's not good. So whether you need some supplementation for sleeping, some natural herbs, or look at your nighttime routine. If you're not sleeping well, if you don't have energy when you wake up, if you're getting brain fog, if you're feeling overloaded, it means you've just gone too far and the oxygen tank is starting to bleed out a little bit. It's not working. It's not giving you what you need. So then you look at how do you structure your day? You look at what your habits are. Are they actually supporting you? You know, some of my clients would say, I don't have exactly, I love that, Teddy, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Some of my clients would wake up and say, oh, you know, for the morning, I just have my vitamins and a black coffee. I'm like, well, how is that starting your day off with nutrients and good fuel and real food? And, you know, they just would, then dinner would be red wine. You know, they were in finance and they just didn't know how to care for themselves. They didn't have any good habits. They weren't moving their body. They'd sleep with the laptop next to them in the bed, the phones next to them in the bed. It's
I know that guy.
just, yeah, it's not good. It's not good, right? So my phone's always in the bathroom. Never ever sleep with the phone, because the phone there, you know, the last thing that you're doing before you go to sleep is scrolling and looking at social media and breaking news. Your whole brain has to go and process all of that while you're trying to sleep. So it'll often wake you up at 2 o'clock in the morning to process. If you haven't had those mini me moments during the day, those Gatorade stops of some deep breathing and some grounding yourself and some letting go of stuff, what's it going to do at 2 o'clock in the morning? It's going to come and haunt you. It's going to say, you haven't dealt with me yet. You haven't breathed me out. You haven't come up with a solution. You've just been running all day. So it's about being excited to want to look after yourself so that you can look after other people. And when we fill the tank with great habits and great routines and rhythms and rituals, and we put the mask on, we have a big ripple effect, don't we? We can help a lot more people. And that's actually what gives us fulfillment in life, not just achievement. I think we get a bit obsessed with achieving and we forget about what actually fulfills us and makes us feel really good.
And on that front, I guess I'm gonna hit you with a question here and then maybe circle back to another one. How do we, as leaders within our teams or within our communities, how do we both look out for that amongst our colleagues, co-workers, peers, friends, and how might we offer them some support or advice?
Yeah, I think it's always important to be looking out for other people, you know, and seeing the warning signs, like if they're being a bit short, if they're looking really tired, if they're developing some anxiety. And it's about actually asking them, are you okay? And you don't ask it once, you ask it twice, because when you say, are you okay? People say, yes, I'm fine. And then if you say, no, really, are you really okay? And you say it in a different tone and you take it down a notch again, they'll go, actually, no, I'm not coping too well, or I'm feeling really burnt out. Then we can build strategies around it. You can get some support. We can help them put their hand up and ask for help. So I think it's really important to not only be able to notice it in yourself, but definitely to notice it in others and to help them get the support that they need. We might not be able to help them, but we might know somebody that can.
related question, I guess, if I'm in a professional environment and I might have, be they, in a hierarchical sense, someone above me, equal to me, or below me, they might not be willing to share some of these things or admit, certainly in certain professional environments, being able to admit that you are feeling the pressure is very much perceived as a weakness. Any advice around those sort of concepts?
Well, I always put myself first. So I think we're better than any job. And I think that we need to either go and seek some counsel outside of work where we've got some support or a coach or a counsellor. I work with a naturopath very, very closely on my health. And I've got a coach myself that every couple of years I engage a coach for myself, because if I have a big business where I'm speaking all day, coaching people all day, helping people, traveling around the country, speaking on stages until last year, it was everything was output. There's no input. So for me, the input was my habits, my rituals, the pit stops, the taking 3 breaths in the bathroom and slowing myself down. It was writing things out. It was finding gratitude. It was finding some joy in the day. It was my mindset training. Really, really helped me. And I got to do all of that by working with a coach as well, and discovering how I could build a structure that would support me. So if you're out there and you're working and you don't have a structure to support yourself, it's sort of like you're a plant, but no one's coming past watering you all day. And you're just dry and burnt out. It's not good. So nothing happens until we create a structure to support ourselves, to give ourselves whatever it needs to fill your cup. And it's different for all of us. We all have different recipes.
Coming closer towards the end of the time, I'm going to touch on something you touched on there before, talking about devices and things like that. And again, when we caught up and had a little bit of a preparatory chat, you mentioned off the top of your head, I hope you've still got them, some questions around multitasking and device awareness and that type of stuff, which may have touched a little tightly to home for someone like me. You mentioned about some of the sleep challenges and things. Both in a post or a COVID normal world where we're working from home so much, and also in a multi-device, in my world, a technology-driven world. Do you have any suggestions around, attention and dividing attention and those sorts of challenges?
Yeah, we need some tech-free time, so for my family, dinner is at the dinner table. It's non-negotiable. We talk about our rose of the day and our thorn of the day, like what went well today, what didn't go well. At 8:30, I take everybody's phones. They're all gone. And we just have to stop. We have to watch TV or do some stretching or whatever you want to do, but we need some time off. We need some time out, whether you go walking with the dog, whether you go meet a friend and just go walk the blocks, whatever it might be. The human brain needs some time off, because often the first thing that people touch in the morning before they even get up is their phone. They turn the alarm off. So they've created a stress response in the body before we've even taken the covers off. So that's why my phone is away. So I don't want to touch my phone. I have a proper alarm clock. So I'm not going to pick up my phone and start scrolling in bed before I've even got up. So it's the structure of, getting up, moving my body, having breakfast, and then touching my phone, just giving it some space. One of the questions here is, how do you manage excessive workload demands outside of your control? We all have that. I think my husband's a CEO, we all have that. And I think what we need to do is just set some boundaries. We need to be able to work without distraction. And I think a lot of people working from home are distracted. They, the dog's here and, the washing's on, and we're sort of doing a little bit of multitasking. Is a lot. Sometimes things are out of our control and we have to do things, but we also need to have a little bit of a recovery time. So that means, I'm not going to see anyone on the weekend because I really just need to care for myself this weekend and I need some peace. So I'm not going to go out for lunch and dinner with people. I actually need to say no and create some boundary to really look after myself. So remember, you're the asset, and doing some things for ourselves is really important. I work with a lot of directors. I work with a lot of CEOs who are, a lot of them have to be available 24/7, but they still have this ability to create boundary, because it's a little bit like you're the athlete that forgets to leave the track. We need to leave the track. We need to go and refuel to come back to the track to go to training. The ones that lurk around the track the whole time, they're not refueling. They're not training well. They're not showing up well to life. So, yeah, I hope that helps.
So we hit time. I'm going to just wrap up with a couple of statements, and then we'll get to a handful more questions. Keep throwing them in either into the Q&A or into the chat if you've got any as well. There's a couple here. I'm going to foreshadow one, and by foreshadow, ask you one before I wrap up for you to give time to think about it. A little bit more from your personal experience. A question here about a little touchy, hence the warning. What are some of the things that really frustrate you about your clients or about your role? But let me leave you to ponder that one while I just say a couple of words.
Yeah.
And as you can see on screen here, there are the two websites, the OpusXenta website, particularly from our perspective, the blog and the events tab. You can see our events tab here on the screen, advertising this one, and our upcoming Right Business Tools can revolutionize your sales process. Equally on Shannah's website, apart from the Contact Us, there's a ton of great resources. The slides that you've been resting your eyes on, I drew straight off some of the wallpapers from your website, Shannah, and there's vision boards and all kinds of fantastic tools on there as well. So have a look and reach out there as well. And as I said at the start, and I'll reiterate it here as well, today's event has been recorded. We will be distributing that recording, and please feel free to share it as widely as brings you joy. In a related note, as I always say here, if there's something that you would like us to speak about in a future event, or someone that you would like us to approach to speak, we run these sessions for the death care sector and the death care community. So please throw it in the chat, throw it in the Q&A, throw it out via direct contact. On that particular note, our direct contact items will be up on the screen in a sec, but please reach out and let us know. So having said that, I've given you a notice on a question without notice.
What frustrates me about my clients? For me personally, as a coach, when people come to a coach, it's like coming to a personal trainer. So they say they want to get fit, but they don't really. So we give them all of our energy and ideas and strategies and structure and resources and care, and we listen and we really give ourselves, and then they don't do anything with it. That's what I find really frustrating. It's like you've written the program for them to get fit and you've trained them, but in between they've just gone and eaten McDonald's. It's like, it's really, as a coach, it's actually quite difficult, because you front up for them, ready to keep helping them, knowing that they're not going to help themselves. I think that is the hardest thing for a coach or a trainer to have to deal with.
I can see that in a very minor way. As a process technology professional, sometimes we face the same challenges. We kind of given you all these tools. It'd be really great to see you using them.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Let's spin out to some of the other questions we've got here. One, and I guess in some ways it might be related to something we touched on. How are you seeing workplace stress, or how do you see workplace stress manifesting itself in either your colleagues or your own day-to-day life? A little bit similar but different to, how do I know when I need to take some care?
I think last year I saw an enormous amount of stress that people didn't realize that they were carrying. It was dealing with the change. When we deal with change, we actually go through a grief cycle. We changed last year where we couldn't come to the funeral, or we couldn't go to a coffee shop and sit down and actually have a conversation. We could get a takeaway, or we couldn't go to a restaurant, or all of the things that we felt gave us care or made us happy. Going to the coffee shop, talking to your barista, was taken away. So I think we go through a grief cycle whenever there's change. And because every week last year, even daily, there was breaking news change with Dan Andrews, especially in Victoria here, that people were carrying a lot of grief just for their lifestyle, just for, I miss the office. If you're an introvert and you were home, it was fantastic. But if you were an extrovert and you were home, it was horrific. Or if you didn't know anyone within the 5 kilometres. So I think when people understand that when change happens to us, or we either choose it, we can choose it as well, or it might happen to us, we do need to grieve and we do need to heal, but then we need to create a new plan for ourselves. And I think that it's allowing yourself to be a bit sad sometimes about things, know what it takes to fill your tank and heal yourself, and then want to show up and feel great. So I always ask people, how do you want to feel this year? Not what do you want to do, but how do you want to feel? I want to feel light. I want to feel vibrant. I want to feel energetic. So I don't want to go back to last year, but I want to deal with change with lightness and just flow with it rather than holding on too tightly or getting angry and resentful.
I love that. I think that's an important nuance, and I guess from listening to what you said there, almost answer with an adjective rather than rather than a goal. I like that.
Yes.
One here, which I'm going to ever so slightly paraphrase to give you a nice free hit as well. How can I advocate for a program like yours within my organisation?
Oh, we'd love that. So last year I was doing, it was like 4 weeks. So every week I would turn up for 30 minutes and we would talk about different self-care strategies, and then we would have a Q&A. So if anyone's interested, please contact me through the website. That would be great. I do have, they're called self-mastery 4-week lunch and learn sessions for companies where the entire staff can log in. There's worksheets, there's workbooks, there's free resources that come with it. And it's about upskilling people on mental health and wellbeing coping strategies. So absolutely, please contact me and we put something together for you.
Now, looking at the time, we're running pretty well, okay, but I've learned, and I hope everyone here's learned a lot. And here's something that I learned off a colleague of mine a while ago. It's a question that I'm going to, at least unless we get anything else, finish with. What's the question that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
Oh, that's you've just pulled that one on me, haven't you?
I
The
have,
question
threw
you
that
should
one
ask
out,
me.
no warning.
I think it's the question you should ask is, what's the most important person in the world? And I would always say you. And nobody ever puts themselves at the top of the list. They say it's their family or their friends, but it's actually you. And I always say to people, what's the most important person to you? And they always reel off a lot of people, but it's really you, because you are your own best friend. You're with yourself from your first breath to your last breath. So it's about caring for this person, being connected to this person, making great decisions for this person, and honouring this person.
I love it. All right, well, thank you very much. We've gone a tiny bit over time, but that's always the intention with the questions. There's a couple more here that we didn't quite get to, but we'll reach out to those offline. As I said before, you can see my and Shannah's contact details here on the screen, and there's the websites for both of us as well. Reach out. We'd love to have a chat to you on either or any topic. Thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you again soon. Thank you very much, Shannah. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hope everyone took something away.
Undoubtedly.